So, welcome to episode 9 of the Common Talk podcast. Obviously, as I mentioned in the previous episode, Oliver is unfortunately ill, so it is just me today. And I thought, do you know what? I wanted to make a very specific type of video, it's a specific type of podcast, sorry. We've also got no cameras on today, just because I thought it'd be easier just to get in front of you in terms of the audio, and then we'll be back to our usual kind of positions next week. So let's have a little conversation about economics. Obviously, my background in terms of this is that I went to university, I studied economics, BSc economics. I then went to work in London for a bit in wealth management. So I have a kind of fundamental understanding of how economics works and how important it is for a country. I think a lot of people overlook it. They kind of just know it as a word. They don't really know what it means, and that's fair. Economics is a very difficult thing to determine, to describe. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to describe it like this. Now, before I do this video, I do want you to understand that I'm obviously, I'm just a normal guy. You know, I'm not a professor. I'm not a next level economics guru. But I have a bit of an understanding of it. And I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about the history of the UK and specifically why we are in the shits now. What caused it? Where did it start? Where's it going? You know, I want to talk about that. This isn't a video necessarily I would do with Oliver. I thought it would just be really good to give our viewers a fundamental understanding of how all this stuff works together. Because, you know, sure, you talk about it at the pub and stuff, but not many people actually understand how this will work. So, hey, if you watch this video, it might actually give you a little bit of talking point, or your mates looking at you like you are somehow now the Wolf of Wall Street. So, let's get into it. Why are we in the position we are in right now, economically, politically? Where did it start? So I'm going to take you back. Now, for the purpose of this, I'm not going to talk about everything. There is a lot of things that happened in between this, but I'm going to speak about the most influential things, right? So firstly, I'm going to take you back to the 60s and 70s. I'm going to take you to the time of Thatcherism, right? Margaret Thatcher. Love her or hate her. Thatcher is seen as a very influential figure because she really boosted the UK economy. But how did she do that? Well, the general idea of what you need to know is she wanted to turn the UK into a service-based economy more than a kind of export-based economy. You may or may not know, up north was massive industries. Mining, oil, coal machinery, a lot of our warehouses and factories were up north. Birmingham area and above. So, what happened? Well, essentially, Thatcher did not like unions. That's what you need to know. Thatcher did not like unions at all. And her interpretation was she was going to abolish, or try to do her best to abolish unions. And she did. She did. She created London as the hub for a service-based economy. And in doing so, she kind of killed a lot of the up north industries. And that's why if you go up north today, you'll find a lot of these old warehouses, a lot of rundown towns. And a lot of them used to be the pre-factory towns. A lot of people lived there and they thrived. Unfortunately, since Thatcher, there hasn't been a heap of development up north. In fact, there's been such a disproportionate amount to London. And that's why now London's just the hub. You know, if you want to get a job out of university, a lot of people look to London because that's the only place you can find those types of jobs out of university. Quite a sad place. And that's going to bite us in the arse. It really is in the future and probably the near future. But we'll talk about it in another video and I might mention it a bit later on. So, what else did Thatcher do? Now, I'm going to lay a seed for you here. and it's important, but you need to stay with me. During Thatcher's time, she made it so that if you were a council tenant, you will have the position to buy a property at a discounted rate. Now, this still exists some places, not all places, but this is going to play a really important role in how housing works now, and should I say, lack of housing. So, to move forward very massively in time, to move forward a couple of recessions and all of that stuff, we find ourselves in the pre-COVID era. And everyone's favourite cereal, Brexit. A situation that really divided the nation, and it hasn't really recovered since then. And therefore, it's a really interesting situation. So, what happened in Brexit? Well, I'm sure if you're from the UK, you're aware. Right, we left the EU. Now, the problem is with leaving the EU, we had so many trade agreements in place, and all of a sudden they disappeared. The UK had to go out and find and rejig these trade agreements, and it hasn't gone well. We never really did it. We never really agreed on what we wanted. And the big selling point of Brexit was that we were going to have control of our borders. How's that happened? How's that gone? Not very well. So ultimately, whether you're right or left, I think we can agree universally that Brexit hasn't really lived up to the hype it was sold at. You know, and that's a very nice way of saying it. So we left the EU. Obviously, we've had a difficult time adjusting in terms of trade agreements, and we never really met up with those trade agreements. Obviously, we've got the US now, but that was since Trump increased tariffs, and that hasn't had a positive impact on the UK as a whole. And now we're going to skip forward a couple of years, and we're going to talk about the pre-COVID energy crisis. This is something that we forget a lot about, because not a lot of people remember that this happened pre-COVID-19, or in the global midst of COVID-19, but it wasn't caused by COVID. We had the situation where we were one of the leaders in renewable energy, and we got very unlucky with weather. As farmers would know, if you've watched Jeremy Clarkson's farm, you'll know that weather plays an important role in farming, and it does so with renewable energy, funnily enough. Because we had less sun and a lot less wind, we had this predicament where suddenly our reserves of energy just weren't there. And that increased prices for people. And that wasn't necessarily a good thing at all. So that was the first squeeze, if you could imagine it like that, right? It was the first squeeze to British households, and it was a really difficult situation for them. Really difficult situation for them. So that leaves the way to COVID. Obviously, everyone knows what COVID-19 is. Everyone does know now, and everyone will know in the future. It was a worldwide virus that shut everything down. Okay. So, what was the economics effects of COVID? This is where it gets a bit difficult, because we were put into a situation we'd never been in before, especially not with an economy like we had. You know, you can't even really compare the 60s to now, because the economy has changed so much. And the last time a really big, virus spread around the world was, well, a long time ago. And it had a far-reaching effect. So, what happened? Right, well, COVID happened, and the UK decided to lock down, like other countries. Now, To supplement people's salaries, they created the furlough scheme, right? During that furlough scheme, you had people essentially at home being paid. Great. Great for the individuals. It's nice, it's fun. It was probably one of the best summers as well you could imagine in terms of weather. It was nice and hot. Everyone was out having a good time. But there was something happening beyond the surface there. When people were sat on their ass and they couldn't go out and spend money at restaurants, what do? Well, they spend money online. They spend money on Amazon. They spend money on, streaming services. Great. The problem is that in an economic point of view, people spending money is really important. It's an injection of capital into the economy. Because you need to think of it this way. It's not just about spending money at the shop. Okay? Let's say you buy an apple at a store. Okay? You may think that money is going to the store, which it is. Great. It's going to help them with business. Awesome. But it's way bigger than that. Here's how you need to imagine it. A person spends money at a store. They buy an apple. That money goes to the business. The business then uses that money to either increase infrastructure in the business, grow the business, which then fuels external contractors, or it's given out to employees. What do employees do? Well, the employees take that money, they buy housing with it, they buy, they buy clothes with it, they buy food with it, and then that dollar, then fuels that business. It's this exponential increase. You can almost think of it as this as a divide. It starts off with one transaction, and by the end, there's thousands of transactions happening, all from the same pound. And that is a similar situation with what's supposed to happen. Problem is, what happens when that doesn't happen? Well, then businesses are suffering. Lots of service-based businesses are suffering. Lots of storefront businesses are suffering. So the government tried to assist them as well. Now, all while doing that, the government had to borrow billions. Billions of pounds from the World Bank. Because the UK can't just print money. We talked about this roughly in a couple of episodes ago. But printing money is not a good thing, because when you print so much money, inflation increases. And why does inflation have to increase? Well, it's simple. The more money you print, the less valuable it is. Okay? If you imagine a store had a golden apple, that golden apple would be worth a fortune. People would be lined up to pay top dollar for that apple. And now imagine that there's 55 golden apples. Well, it's not as luxury as it was before, so people are not willing to spend as much. So, how do people counter that? Well, you have to increase price, right? So when they print more money, prices have to increase because there's just more money out there in the supply. And the overall value of it has gone down. So the money's printed. So the money can only be printed so much before they have to utilise other means. And the way they print money is not by getting in a massive factory and printing money. They use something called quantitative easing. We talked about it in the last episode. Basically, what you need to know is the Bank of England will essentially buy up certain assets, and then that money is then injected into the economy that way. That's the very bareback basic answer of how it happens. Anyway, so they inject the money into the economy through QE, but they have to borrow billions because they can't massively print loads of money because it will increase inflation. And having high inflation is not good for anyone. So, let me recap that bit quickly. COVID, people stayed at homes. The government was supplementing their income, so they weren't spending it in shop fronts, and therefore that would affect GDP, the general growth of the country. They were spending it offshore, Amazon, places like that, streaming services, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. We were borrowing billions of pounds to do so. And what we need to remember here, moving on to the next part, is that our rates were low. Rates were low. Since 2008, rates were hovered around 0.1%. Very low interest rates. Why? Well, you could argue very much so incompetence at best. Really, what should have happened is kind of pre-2012, 2013, they should have started to increase rates very slowly so that it wouldn't have a drastic effect on the economy. But they didn't. They kept them very low, which meant borrowing money was really easy. And that fueled, as you could imagine, the housing crisis. Because a lot of people in their prime had the ability to buy property at massively discounted rates, they were buying property, restricting the actual supply of property available. But we'll talk about that in a bit. So, what happened post-COVID? Okay, so the doors open. People are allowed outside. People are allowed to shop. They're allowed to, go out, spend money, have fun. Well, here's the thing. The businesses were already suffering. They were on the brink. So what the government did is they created their Eat Out to Help Out scheme. I'm sure we all remember that. It was the scheme where you can go out, you can go to the restaurant, and you get 50% off your food. Great. Everyone loved it. Everyone loved it. I loved it. You loved it. I'm sure we did. Okay? Now, that was only fueling government debt. Who was paying for that? The other 50% of those meals? Well, it was the government. The government was paying it. Quite a clever idea, you may argue. But this is when the first of our problems started. Okay? And it wasn't an overnight problem, but it came from this. When people rapidly started to spend money, prices also increased rapidly because businesses wanted to recoup what they lost. They wanted to recoup value, so they increased price. Fine. People were quite willing to pay because for the first time they weren't travelling to work. They probably had a little bit more money in the wallet. Wanted to go out, maybe have a nice meal, buy themselves something nice. Right? Now, when that happened, the businesses had to increase price. And when businesses increase prices, we have an inflationary boom. Right? Now, what also fueled that inflationary boom was energy prices. Why? Well, because of a little war in Eastern Europe. You may know it. It's called Ukraine. When every European country started to dox Russian oil, we fell on our knees, essentially. And therefore, big energy companies had to pay higher prices for the fuel, for the energy. Okay? They had to pay higher prices, and what happened was that was passed on to consumers. Businesses will always pass on their costs to consumers. There is nearly no businesses out there that will go, okay, we're increasing, we've had our costs increase, so what we're going to do is we're going to hold prices because we care about people. That's not what happens. Businesses will increase costs to avoid having to lay off staff. So, okay, fine. So, during this time, we had a growing inflation, and that fueled it. We had increased prices, essentially, which the firms passed on to consumers, and then, that leads to higher inflation. The value of the pound diminishes because more money is essentially being spent. There's a larger money supply. I'm not going to get into money supply, money demand, because I want to keep this as simple as I possibly can. But, when you have so much of something, the value is lost. And when the value is lost, you need to increase the prices of it to recoup that loss. And that's what inflation is. The increase in prices over time. So, that inflationary boom, I think we all remember. Everything started just blowing up in price. We're still experiencing the fallout of that now. We're still not at the 2% target, which we should remain for a growing economy. But inflation did, or nearly hit, double figures. Let's have a look. Inflation. Yes. Yes, in 2022, October 2022, inflation peaked 11.1%. And the target is 2%. So that's a massive increase. So we had inflationary peaks, massive amounts. But also, the government was stuck, or I should say the government, but it wasn't the government, it was the Bank of England, was stuck with this very uncomfortable reality. The only way to counter higher inflation is to stop people spending money. How do you stop people spending money? Well, you increase interest rates. And that's what they did. They started to rise rates. Now, what does that affect? Well, it affects people's mortgages when they get mortgages at a certain rate, and every depending on your term, you have to obviously create a new deal. And at the end of that deal, at the end of that contract, you have to reapply for a mortgage at the newer rate. So as the rate started to go up, inflation, mortgages became way more expensive, which adds to the pressure of housing, people being able to buy their own house. And along that, rent started to increase. So you may think that this is restricted the money supply, but it's not. It's actually just fueling the fire. Because think about it logically. When, let's say, a renter, a landlord, has to increase rent because the mortgages go up, those rates are going to go to the banks. But it's likely that the banks are then going to use that money to invest and give people mortgages. That's how banks work. And then that fueled a fire. So we got into this period where we had high interest rates. Okay, we also had high inflation, and to couple with that, we also had low GDP growth. The country wasn't growing economically. We were stuck in the mud. If you imagine it like that, we were stuck in a very, very deep, boggy mud, and we couldn't move. We still can't move. We're stuck in that mud. We're drowning in that mud now, but we started to get stuck in it. Now, we call this, in economics, a period of stagflation. Stagnated growth and high inflation. Two things that should work, should have a negative correlation, started to have a positive correlation. Not good. Not good at all. But something else happened when we started to increase interest rates. We started to have to spend more on our services. Or should I say, let me rejig that sentence. When interest rates increased, we had less money to spend on our services. So the costs of these services, the cost of hiring people, the cost of equipment, the cost of running and maintenance increased because of inflation. And suddenly there was less money going around. The government couldn't give much more money. And that is where the services, the NHS, the police, the fire brigade, this is where the problems started for them. So yeah, that takes us nicely into kind of the period we're in now, where we're still struggling to get good GDP growth. Taxes are very high. Companies are unwilling to spend money because there's no future. They can't see much of a future. There's obviously still inflationary pressure. Interest rates are still quite high. It's not a good environment for business. Not a good environment for business at all. And then you have Labour wanting to increase taxes even more for the people, which is just going to reduce spending even more. And therefore, economic growth is going to slump. Are we going to find ourselves in another recession? Maybe. It's possible. Is this the start of a depression? a long period of decreasing GDP. Maybe. It's possible. It is possible. So there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that's housing. And immigration is going to play a part in this as well. So housing is almost its own market. Okay. And during 2008, we obviously had the housing crash. Now, problem is with housing is it's not like a normal asset. A normal asset fluctuates in price. It goes up, it goes down. Housing is not really like that. Housing can go down for a very short period, but then it's followed by, usually a rise. It's just about how quickly it rises. And since 2008, we've had massive blow-ups in property. A very low interest rates massively fueled that, as well as I mentioned earlier about Thatcher allowing council tenants to buy their housing. You need to think of it that we have a certain amount of houses, and that massively reduced the amount of houses we have because people just bought them, which is fine. But there's a cost to that. But the cost was so far in the future, they thought not to think about it. But now we are in that real future. Interest rates have also increased, as I mentioned, from COVID, which meant that buying property has become way more expensive. Along with the actual price of the property, people are paying a lot more in mortgages. A lot of young people can't afford housing. Why? Because they're too much. They're too much. The rates are too high. People can't afford to buy a house and have a family because everything's too high. It doesn't take a genius to realise why young people aren't, having kids. It's because they can't afford it. And for the first time, we're in this possibility where we're questioning, are young people actually going to be able to buy houses? Is a house going to become a new luxury for those that inherit it? Or, hold a really good position? I don't know. And it's a difficult situation to be in nonetheless. But that's the basics of what's happening in the economy from a kind of bird's eye common talk perspective. I'm not going to get too specific. I don't want to. It's the economy is vastly complex, and there's a million things I missed out. But I just wanted to do a touch point on the main things. And, I know it might have been dry for a lot of people. I think it's really important, though. I want people to understand how this works, because then we can make informed decisions about who we elect, who we keep in power. So, anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please, please hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button. Maybe give it a like, give us a rating, and me and Oliver will see you next week for the budget episode. Goodbye.